The courtroom was silent, every eye fixed on the tiny figure in the witness chair. Months of tension, endless hearings, and a family's future hanging by a thread, all waiting for a single moment that no one could have predicted. Then, in the stillness, the toddler opened their mouth and said just one word. That word, simple yet powerful, froze the entire room in an instant. Judges, lawyers, and family members alike were rendered speechless, the gravity of the moment locking down the courtroom with an almost tangible force. What was said would ripple through everyone present, changing the outcome of the adoption and leaving an indelible mark on all who witnessed it. Don't forget to subscribe and like for more shocking stories. The morning of the adoption hearing began quietly, but the air was thick with tension. Every person in the courthouse felt it, an invisible weight pressing down, heavier than the polished floors or the towering columns. On one side, a prospective adoptive family sat in nervous anticipation, their hands clasped, fingers intertwined. They had dreamed of this day for years, filling their home with hope, preparing for a child they longed to welcome. On the other side, the biological family, hearts tethered by love and fear, waited, unsure of what the outcome might bring. Every heartbeat in that room carried the weight of uncertainty. At the center of it all sat the toddler. Small, fragile, and oblivious to the storm around them, they held a presence far larger than their size. To the adults, this child was the prize, the pivot upon which countless futures would turn. They did not speak yet, or at least not in words adults fully understood. But there was an intelligence, a depth in their gaze, that suggested they grasped more than anyone realized. The courthouse itself seemed to respond to the mounting tension. Sunlight streamed through tall windows, catching dust motes in slow motion, creating a halo over the judge's bench. Papers rustled quietly, pens tapped nervously, and whispers floated through the room like fragile echoes. Every participant was hyper-aware that nothing in this hearing would be ordinary. Every decision mattered. Every action, every look could tip the balance. This adoption case had been far from straightforward. Months of legal wrangling, counseling, and background checks had laid the groundwork, but nothing could prepare the adults for the moment the toddler would intervene. The stakes extended beyond paperwork or legal rights. They involved hearts, bonds, and the fragile trust of a child who could not yet fully articulate their wishes. The adoptive parents had endured long nights imagining the day they could finally hold the child in their arms. They had measured cribs, picked out blankets, and decorated rooms with care. Each object in their home had been chosen with intention, with love, as though the walls themselves could anticipate the arrival of a new life. Yet as hopeful as they were, fear had crept in, a subtle, gnawing anxiety that something could go wrong, that the culmination of years of waiting could shatter in an instant. Meanwhile, the biological family carried a different kind of weight. Their love was immediate, instinctive, and unbreakable. They could not imagine the child in another home without feeling a hollow ache deep in their chests. Yet they were also aware of practical realities, circumstances that had prevented them from providing the life they had hoped to give. Every step of the legal process had been agonizing, a delicate dance between hope and resignation. They watched, every muscle tensed, praying for a decision that would honor their bond without condemning the child to hardship. And then there was the judge. Seasoned, authoritative, yet human, they understood the gravity of their role. Every case was unique, every decision monumental, but rarely did one person in their courtroom hold the power to shift an entire room with a single moment. Yet even the judge could not anticipate the interruption that would come from the smallest, quietest participant of all. Time seemed to stretch. Minutes passed with torturous slowness as paperwork was reviewed, testimonies noted, and procedural details observed. The adults held their breaths for the child's reactions, scanning subtle movements, fleeting expressions, small gestures that might reveal preference or comfort. Yet the toddler remained outwardly calm, seemingly unaware of the tension that had consumed every adult in the room. The story of this adoption was already layered with invisible threads. Social workers' reports, psychological assessments, and medical histories all converged into a single narrative, each page representing countless hours of investigation, compassion, and care. Legal arguments grounded in law and precedent were stacked neatly against the unpredictable force of human emotion. Every adult present wrestled with the balance between what was legally correct and what felt right. And yet, all of them underestimated the capacity of a child to assert themselves in a way no one could have predicted. Observers outside the courtroom had their own expectations. Friends and extended family members, sitting in the public gallery, waited silently, the tension mirrored in their taut shoulders and anxious expressions. For them, the hearing represented more than a legal process. It was a final reckoning, a moment when years of concern and hope could either culminate in joy or descend into heartbreak. As the hearing progressed, the atmosphere thickened. The toddlers shifted slightly, their small movements amplified in the hushed room. The adults leaned forward instinctively, eyes fixed on every twitch, every glance. It was a subtle dance of anticipation, the calm before the storm. Nobody knew it yet, but the quiet would soon break in a way that would silence the entire courthouse. This moment was not about paperwork or testimony. It was about truth. It was about the unspoken, the instinctive, the innate way a child could assert their voice in the face of authority. It was about the moment when a single word, spoken clearly and deliberately, would rip through the layers of adult expectation and force the room to confront something far larger than themselves. Every adult present felt the weight of responsibility. The adoptive parents prayed silently that the child would show comfort in their presence. The biological family hoped for reassurance that love was not being disregarded. And the judge, aware of the immense responsibility, remained composed, waiting for the evidence that could guide a life-altering decision. And then, a subtle shift occurred. The child's gaze turned intentionally, focus sharpening, posture changing in a way that commanded attention. It was almost imperceptible, yet everyone noticed. The silence became thicker, more palpable, as if the room itself was bracing for the moment when the child would speak. That word, small yet monumental, was coming. It would echo far beyond the walls of that courtroom, leaving a lasting impression on all who witnessed it. The adults did not yet know the magnitude of what was about to happen. They did not know that years of planning, anxiety, hope and fear would culminate in a single moment, spoken by a voice so young it could not be measured by adult understanding. But the stage was set. The tension had reached its peak. Every heartbeat, every breath, every flicker of the toddler's expression signaled the approaching climax. This was more than a hearing. It was a crossroads, a turning point in multiple lives. And while the adults prepared for procedural outcomes, the toddler prepared to take the floor, asserting agency in a way no one could have anticipated. The scene was poised for something extraordinary. Every observer, from the judge to the parents, from lawyers to social workers, felt the anticipation tighten like a wire. The quiet was thick with possibility, and in the next moment, that silence would be shattered forever. The hearing moved forward slowly, each minute stretching like hours. Every detail mattered, the way the child shifted in the chair, the flicker of an eye toward one adult, the subtle curl of a finger on a blanket. Lawyers spoke in measured tones, presenting legal precedents, family backgrounds, and psychological assessments. But beneath the formalities, an invisible drama unfolded. Every adult present sensed it, though no one could yet name it. The child was about to change everything. The adoptive parents' excitement was tempered with anxiety. Every movement of the toddler was magnified, interpreted, and replayed in their minds. Was that a nod of recognition? A moment of comfort or fear? Their hearts raced with anticipation, aware that every instinct and gesture could influence the hearing's outcome. They had waited years for this chance, preparing meticulously, but nothing in their planning had prepared them for what was coming. The biological family, equally tense, watched with silent apprehension. Each glance, each smile, each twitch of the toddler's hand carried immense significance. They had nurtured this child since birth, enduring hardship and making sacrifices they hoped would not be overlooked. Every detail mattered: how the toddler responded to familiar faces, how they reacted to the courtroom environment, even how they grasped a small toy held loosely in their tiny hands. It was a test, though no one knew the rules, and the child held the power. Meanwhile, the toddler's behavior grew increasingly deliberate. Small gestures, the tilt of the head, The way they turned toward certain voices hinted at awareness beyond the adults' expectations. It was subtle, almost imperceptible, but those paying close attention could see it. The room was filled with questions that could not yet be answered. Which family did the child recognize as safe? Which presence elicited comfort or fear? Every adult in the room was acutely aware that this small person could upend years of legal deliberation in a single instant. The social worker's notes added another layer of complexity. Observations recorded over months detailed the child's preferences, reactions, and emotional responses. Yet, even these reports could not predict the raw, instinctive reaction that was about to occur. Adults could theorize, analyze, and speculate, but the toddler's voice, tiny yet commanding, was unpredictable. As minutes passed, the tension coiled tighter. Lawyers presented arguments, citing statutes and precedents, their words flowing over a room holding its collective breath. Each sentence was a background note to the crescendo building beneath the surface. The emotional stakes were rising alongside the legal stakes. Years of anticipation, loss, and hope converged into a single moment. Outside the courtroom, observers waited, unaware of the storm inside. Friends, extended family, and a few curious onlookers had gathered in the galleries, whispering among themselves, speculating on outcomes that seemed so far beyond their understanding. Yet even they could feel the energy seeping through the doors. Something monumental was imminent. The child's behavior grew more pronounced. Tiny hands fidgeted with a blanket, eyes scanned faces deliberately, head tilting towards certain individuals with focus that seemed intentional. Adults leaned in instinctively, trying to interpret these small signs. Every movement, no matter how minute, became a signal. Lawyers paused, judges adjusted posture, and the room collectively braced for what was coming next. An hour or more into the proceedings, the child's awareness became undeniable. Their gaze shifted directly toward one adult, the one who had been consistently present through the previous hearings, the one who had nurtured and comforted them in the quiet moments away from the courtroom. The child's body language radiated recognition, a silent declaration that this person mattered. It was subtle but unequivocal, a moment so small it might have been missed if not for the heightened tension in the room. The adoptive parents felt a surge of hope and anxiety simultaneously. Every instinct told them that the child's attention might indicate comfort, preference, or attachment. Yet each second carried uncertainty. Could this fleeting gesture truly signify the child's desires, or was it merely a coincidental movement in a room full of stress and unfamiliar faces? Each adult understood the stakes. One decision, one overlooked sign, and the future of this child's life could be irrevocably altered. The biological family, too, noted the subtle cues. They recognized patterns, behaviors, and gestures that suggested understanding and recognition. A small smile, a relaxed posture, a turn of the head, all seemed to carry weight far beyond what any adult expected. Their hearts tightened in anticipation, aware that the child might speak a single word that could encapsulate months of unseen emotions, desires, and instincts. The judge, experienced yet human, felt a shift in the room's energy. Every observer sensed it, the electricity before a storm. Procedures continued, but the room's attention was no longer on the legal arguments. Instead, it had moved to the child, whose tiny presence had grown into a gravitational force pulling everyone's focus. The tension was not just legal or procedural. It was emotional, visceral, impossible to ignore. Minutes stretched as if elastic, each heartbeat amplified in the hushed room. Adults interpreted gestures with the intensity of scholars decoding ancient scripts. Lawyers, social workers, and family members alike leaned in, waiting for the moment the child would assert themselves. The atmosphere thickened, heavy with anticipation and unspoken hope. Then came the prelude to revelation. The child's breathing changed subtly, posture shifted, and hands grasped the edge of the chair with purpose. Every adult in the room sensed the impending declaration. The silence was thick, vibrating with expectation. Every eye followed the toddler's every micro-movement. Even the judge, trained to observe without reaction, could feel the magnitude of what was about to happen. For the adults in the room, time slowed. They were trapped between past preparations and the present moment, between analysis and instinct, between fear and hope. The child, unaware of the magnitude of the moment, became the axis upon which everyone's emotions pivoted. One word, one utterance would soon rip through the formalities, tearing away the procedural veneer and exposing raw, undeniable truth. And so the room held its breath. Every adult poised, every observer silent, every emotion taut. The child's gaze settled, attention unwavering, and the moment approached with inevitability. The tension, built meticulously over weeks, months, and years, reached its zenith. The toddler's voice, small yet monumental, was about to declare more than any adult could have orchestrated. In that quiet, electric pause, everyone understood the power a single word could wield. This was not merely a legal hearing. It was a test of instinct, trust, and emotional truth. And the child, in their simplicity and innocence, held the key to the outcome, ready to unleash a word that would lock down the courtroom and change every life present in an instant. The room fell silent. Every eye fixed on the toddler, small and still, perched in the witness chair that had suddenly become the center of the universe. Every breath slowed. The air itself seemed heavier, as though anticipating the moment that was about to unfold. The adults in the room, lawyers, social workers, the judge, adoptive parents, and biological family, leaned forward almost instinctively, hearts pounding with expectation and fear. For months, years even, lives had been meticulously examined, every detail scrutinized. But all the preparation, all the argumentation, all the legal maneuvering could not anticipate the raw, instinctive agency of a child. Here, in this moment, the world narrowed to one point, the toddler. Then it happened. A single word, small but resonant, escaped their lips. Simple, innocuous in its sound, yet seismic in its impact. The word rippled through the courtroom with the force of a tidal wave, leaving everyone frozen mid-action. Papers hung suspended in the air. Pens hovered over documents. Even the sunlight streaming through the windows seemed to pause, caught in the gravity of the moment. The effect was immediate. Judges' eyes widened, gavel poised but forgotten in midair. Lawyers froze, pens mid-scribble, their carefully constructed arguments suspended in the air, irrelevant in the face of this single utterance. The adoptive parents gasped silently, hearts caught between elation and disbelief. The biological family's faces registered shock and awe. Recognition that the tiny voice had spoken the truth, transcending all adult maneuvering, all legal procedures, all speculation. The courtroom itself seemed to react, an almost tangible force locking the doors, the walls, the very air around them into a moment of suspended reality. Every adult became aware that the power in this room no longer lay in experience, authority, or procedure. It rested entirely in the small figure who had chosen to speak. One word, a single syllable, had shattered months of deliberation. Observers later would describe the moment in almost mythic terms. The gavel did not fall. The lawyers did not continue. The judge, for the first time in decades of hearings, simply leaned back, absorbing the force of what had just occurred. No one moved. No one spoke. The word had demanded that time itself pause. And for those brief, eternal seconds, the world was nothing but that child's voice. The word's power lay not in its complexity, but in its clarity. It was simple, pure, unmistakable, a declaration of desire, comfort, and recognition that transcended the boundaries of law and authority. In that one moment, the child articulated what no adult, no document, no testimony could fully convey. Every previous argument, every report, every legal precedent dissolved in the face of a truth that was immediate, instinctive, undeniable. The judge, seasoned and authoritative, understood the weight instantly. This was not procedural. This was not about precedent. This was raw, emotional truth, compressed into a single syllable, delivered with the force of instinct. With deliberate calm, the judge signaled for the courtroom to remain as it was, doors locked, eyes fixed, absorbing the gravity. Even trained professionals, trained to detach, found themselves caught in the emotional pull. The adoptive parents felt a tidal wave of relief and terror. The word confirmed attachment, preference, or recognition. But it also demanded respect, patience, and careful interpretation. Their years of preparation suddenly felt both validated and irrelevant. Every plan, every expectation, had been overturned by the spontaneous truth of a child's voice. The biological family's emotions were equally complex. Shock, pride, and awe mingled with fear and hope. That single word carried within it the essence of instinctive choice, and the recognition that the child's voice could not and would not be ignored. Years of love, concern, and sacrifice crystallized into a moment that no adult could have orchestrated or anticipated. The social workers, trained to interpret gestures, expressions, and subtle cues, found their expertise humbled by this display. They realized that no amount of observation or documentation could predict or capture the impact of a child's singular moment of clarity. The word had communicated attachment, recognition, and preference in a way that transcended human preparation and legal procedure. The courtroom's stillness stretched, an eternal moment compressed into minutes as the adults absorbed what had occurred. Then, almost imperceptibly, reactions began to ripple outward. Some exhaled slowly, the tension releasing like a coiled spring. Others pressed hands to mouths, overwhelmed by the emotional force. Heads turned toward each other, seeking confirmation, validation, reassurance that what they had witnessed was real. The weight of that word reshaped the narrative instantly. Legal arguments, procedural motions, and months of analysis were overshadowed by the child's assertion. In one instant, the scales of justice, hope, and human emotion had shifted irrevocably. The courtroom, once a sterile arena of rules and documentation, became a chamber of revelation, humility, and awe. Even the walls seemed to acknowledge the moment. Sunlight refracted across polished wood, catching dust in golden rays as though celebrating the tiny figure who had commanded the room's attention. Every adult, every observer, every heart in the chamber felt the resonance of truth. The word had done more than articulate preference. It had leveled hierarchies, transcended authority, and forced recognition of the child as the ultimate arbiter of their own future. The judge, maintaining composure, allowed the moment to settle. The gavel remained still. The legal machinery paused. The courtroom had been transformed from an arena of procedure into a stage of revelation. That single utterance had illustrated what no argument, no documentation, and no debate could. The child's voice mattered above all. Observers outside the courtroom would later describe the incident as surreal, almost cinematic, yet every person inside knew the reality was undeniable. The power of instinct, the clarity of choice, and the authority of the child's voice had rewritten the proceedings in real time. No one would forget that moment. It had imprinted on every mind present, a permanent record of truth, agency, and human intuition. The word's simplicity belied its consequence. It demanded pause, recognition, and respect. In an instant, it resolved unspoken questions and laid bare the child's desires. It was a signal so clear, so immediate, that every adult recognized the gravity of interpreting it correctly. Lives, decisions, and futures depended on the wisdom with which they responded. The courtroom's energy shifted. Tension gave way to realization. Adults, previously consumed by rules, procedures, and expectations, now confronted an elemental truth. The child's voice was the compass. Every decision from that point forward would be guided by the instinct expressed in that single, monumental word, and as the child's gaze returned to innocence, unaware of the impact they had created, the adults around them absorbed a collective understanding. Authority had been humbled. Power had been balanced. Emotion had spoken louder than law, and the courtroom, locked in place for those unforgettable moments, would forever carry the imprint of what had just occurred. The climax of this adoption hearing had arrived and passed in a moment that felt both eternal and instantaneous. It was a reminder that the smallest among us could command the largest impact, that truth often comes unadorned, and that a single voice, when brave enough, could reshape the course of countless lives. The social workers, trained to interpret gestures, expressions, and subtle cues, found their expertise humbled by this display. They realized that no amount of observation or documentation could predict or capture the impact of a child's singular moment of clarity. The word had communicated attachment, recognition, and preference in a way that transcended human preparation and legal procedure. The courtroom's stillness stretched, an eternal moment compressed into minutes as the adults absorbed what had occurred. Then, almost imperceptibly, reactions began to ripple outward. Some exhaled slowly, the tension releasing like a coiled spring. Others pressed hands to mouths, overwhelmed by the emotional force. Heads turned toward each other, seeking confirmation, validation, reassurance that what they had witnessed was real. The weight of that word reshaped the narrative instantly. Legal arguments, procedural motions, and months of analysis were overshadowed by the child's assertion. In one instant, the scales of justice, hope, and human emotion had shifted irrevocably. The courtroom, once a sterile arena of rules and documentation, became a chamber of revelation, humility, and awe. Even the walls seemed to acknowledge the moment. Sunlight refracted across polished wood, catching dust in golden rays as though celebrating the tiny figure who had commanded the room's attention. Every adult, every observer, every heart in the chamber felt the resonance of truth. The word had done more than articulate preference. It had leveled hierarchies, transcended authority, and forced recognition of the child as the ultimate arbiter of their own future. The judge, maintaining composure, allowed the moment to settle. The gavel remained still. The legal machinery paused. The courtroom had been transformed from an arena of procedure into a stage of revelation. That single utterance had illustrated what no argument, no documentation, and no debate could. The child's voice mattered above all. Observers outside the courtroom would later describe the incident as surreal, almost cinematic, yet every person inside knew the reality was undeniable. The power of instinct, the clarity of choice, and the authority of the child's voice had rewritten the proceedings in real time. No one would forget that moment. It had imprinted on every mind present, a permanent record of truth, agency, and human intuition. The word's simplicity belied its consequence. It demanded pause, recognition, and respect. In an instant, it resolved unspoken questions and laid bare the child's desires. It was a signal so clear, so immediate, that every adult recognized the gravity of interpreting it correctly. Lives, decisions, and futures depended on the wisdom with which they responded. The courtroom's energy shifted. Tension gave way to realization. Adults, previously consumed by rules, procedures, and expectations, now confronted an elemental truth. The child's voice was the compass. Every decision from that point forward would be guided by the instinct expressed in that single, monumental word, and as the child's gaze returned to innocence, unaware of the impact they had created, the adults around them absorbed a collective understanding. Authority had been humbled, power had been balanced, emotion had spoken louder than law, and the courtroom, locked in place for those unforgettable moments, would forever carry the imprint of what had just occurred. The climax of this adoption hearing had arrived and passed in a moment that felt both eternal and instantaneous. It was a reminder that the smallest among us could command the largest impact, that truth often comes unadorned, and that a single voice, when brave enough, could reshape the course of countless lives.